The Long Road to Parenthood. Sarah and Daniel's story. Sarah and Daniel had always pictured their future with children in it. It wasn't just idle talk or abstract dreams. It was woven into the everyday moments. Sunday mornings when Daniel would fry eggs and say, "Someday we'll have a little one running around here." Or when Sarah would pick up a children's book at a thrift store for later and place it on the growing shelf in the second bedroom. It was that quiet, yellow, painted room bathed in soft light in the afternoons that held their hopes like a secret. They started trying a few months after Sarah turned 30. At first, it was exciting. They made jokes about who the baby would look like, took vitamins, marked calendars, and even bought baby clothes they hid in the back of a drawer, believing it would happen quickly. After all, they were healthy, relatively young, and ready. Everyone around them was having babies. But after 6 months, then a year of negative tests, that soft hope began to harden into worry. Sarah began watching the dates obsessively. She would sit on the bathroom floor with a test in her hand, staring at it like it held the universe. Each single line felt like failure, though she'd tell herself otherwise. Daniel would try to comfort her, but she often withdrew. Wrapping herself in silence, she didn't know how to explain. They saw their doctor. Tests followed. Blood work. Ultrasounds. Semen analysis. There was no dramatic diagnosis. Everything was normal. The problem wasn't obvious, but it was real. Unexplained infertility. 2 words that gave no answers, only more questions. It felt like being trapped in a room with no doors. That's when their lives began to orbit around fertility. Meals were planned around anti-inflammatory foods. Sex became a schedule, not an intimacy. They stopped drinking wine, stopped traveling, even skipped a friend's destination wedding in Italy because the IVF schedule wouldn't allow it. Friends tried to be supportive, but didn't understand. They offered well-meaning advice. Just relax. Or, have you tried acupuncture? Not realizing how isolating it felt. The first IVF cycle was brutal. Sarah's body became unfamiliar, bloated, bruised, hormonal. She felt like a science experiment, and yet she held on to hope with white-knuckled hands. 2 embryos were transferred. She spent those 2 weeks trying not to move too much, whispering prayers into the silence of the house. It failed. The second cycle brought a chemical pregnancy, a faint pink line on a test, which quickly faded into a darker red on the sheets. She sat on the bathroom floor that night and didn't come out for hours. Daniel tried to stay strong. He told himself that his role was to protect, to support, to fix, but nothing could be fixed. And there were nights when, after Sarah had fallen asleep, he'd go for walks alone, ending up on park benches, staring at the dark sky, asking a God he barely believed in, why? During the third IVF cycle, something miraculous happened. A heartbeat. At 7 weeks, they heard it, a tiny, rapid flutter that sounded like galloping hooves. They clung to it like a lifeline. Sarah began allowing herself to hope again. She even bought a baby blanket. At 9 weeks, the heartbeat was gone. They walked out of the clinic with the world muted around them. The sun was shining. People were laughing on sidewalks. But to Sarah and Daniel, the world had stopped. Sarah went through a D.C. procedure in silence. Afterwards, she asked the nurse, "What happens to the tissue?" The nurse gently said, "It's treated as medical waste." That stayed with Sarah for weeks. Waste. She felt like her body had betrayed her. They spent the next year in limbo. Not quite grieving, not quite moving on. Friends' babies were turning into toddlers. Shower invites came less often now. People assumed they wouldn't want to attend. And they were right. Each event felt like a reminder of something slipping further from their grasp. But it wasn't over. One evening, in the hush after dinner, Sarah looked across the table and said, "I think I want to try adoption." She said it hesitantly, almost like asking permission. Daniel didn't hesitate. "I do too," he said. It was the first thing that had felt right in a long time. They began the process. Home studies, interviews, paperwork, background checks. Creating a profile felt strangely vulnerable, curating their lives for a stranger's decision. "This is who we are," the pages seemed to say. "Please choose us." Months passed. They were considered by 2 birth mothers. Both changed their minds. It hurt, but differently. Not like the violent loss of a miscarriage, but like being turned away at the door of something you'd hoped to enter. Then came the call. A baby boy had been born in Idaho. The mother had read their profile. She wanted them. Could they be there by morning? They drove through the night, adrenaline and anxiety mixing in their veins. Sarah didn't speak for most of the drive, afraid that if she said anything, it would vanish. At the hospital, they were led into a private room, and then a nurse placed the baby into Sarah's arms. He was tiny, barely 7 pounds. His eyes were closed, his breath soft and steady. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a tightness she'd carried for years suddenly giving way to something lighter. It wasn't just joy, it was relief. Grief and love braided together. Daniel reached out and touched his son's hand, and the baby gripped his finger. They named him Elijah. Elijah is 5 now. He loves bedtime stories and building things with Legos. He's curious and kind, and has a little dimple on one cheek when he smiles. Sometimes, Sarah still sits in the yellow room at night, listening to him breathe, remembering all the versions of motherhood she once dreamed about. It doesn't look how she imagined, but it feels exactly right. She and Daniel still carry the scars of those years, but they don't resent them. Those years made them stronger, more tender, more present. They understand that parenthood isn't just biology. It's devotion, perseverance, and a kind of love that doesn't give up.